Hi, we're Quentin Curious Volumes. My name is James. I'm back here in my original seat to talk to you today about a book I've been saying since the beginning of the year I'm going to read. Here is Volume 3 of In Search of Lost Time, Marcel Proust's Guermantes Way. Guermantes Way. It's the third volume of In Search of Lost Time. So, I've talked about sections of this book in some previous videos, mostly my Friday Reads videos. And I think when last I left off, I was about the midway point, and the unnamed narrator was hanging out with Robert de Charlus and his paramour Rachel, or Rachel, or probably Rachel because they're French. And I was talking about how Rachel was showing herself to be a bit of a monster for humiliating a fellow actress. Of course, we also know that Rachel is a prostitute that Marcel, the narrator, encountered in a previous book. Robert de Charlus is a cavalry officer and also a marquis, a French aristocrat. Although this book takes place during the period of the one of the French republics. I don't know if it's the second or the third, but there's no king anymore, or at least there's no reigning king. So the aristocracy doesn't really have any particular power, but they do still have their titles. The narrator is not a member of the aristocracy, though he's apparently from a wealthy family. He doesn't seem to have much concern about getting a job or going to a university. He really never talks about going to school at all. Although at a certain point in probably the first volume, Swan's Way, he decides he's going to be a writer, and then he has conversations with various people, including professional writers, who encourage him or discourage him in different ways. And there's a lot of amusing stuff about him trying to write and procrastinating and hating everything he's written. Which, if you've tried to write, you will probably relate to. That's in earlier volumes. There are things in this book that one reading this book will relate to, and let me find this. Lots of right. So last time we had gone to a gathering where the narrator had finally talked to Madame de Guermantes, who is a duchess, with whom he has been obsessed since the very first volume, and he had spent a lot of this third volume, hanging out on the street, kind of stalking her, just like hoping to meet her out on a walk. And it turns out they end up at the same party together, and they're introduced, and she says, "Oh, I see you out walking. It's very healthy," or something like that. It's pretty funny, in kind of a anti-climax sort of way. Right. So then there is kind of a very sad part where it turns out that the narrator's grandmother is very sick. She suffers a stroke, and there's this real kind of there's a middle section of this book, which is like chapter 1 of part 2, which is about a 50-page section that deals with the narrator and his grandmother and her impending death, and that section ends with her death. But going around to these doctors who sometimes they just don't have the time, or they're very callous, and they'll say, "Oh, well, you've got a good doctor, just take her home to him," or they'll say, she needs to get out more and exercise herself. And then at a certain point, it's clear that she's going to die, and a lot of relatives are coming through. I'm not conveying it well, but it's a very, very moving and sad a section when we learn that grandmother is doomed, as one of the doctors kind of callously says to them. Let me see. Yes. Yeah. So he kind of he's taken her out to a park. I think it is the Champs Elysees, and they revisit a scene from the first volume which is basically a public latrine, and the attendant lets them in without paying, and the narrator has some talk with her, and then they leave, and he starts looking for a physician who can examine her because she does not seem to be well, and they find this doctor, or he's a professor of medicine, and they kind of impose on him when he's getting ready to go out for the evening, and let's see, he says to him, this is the doctor speaking. "Your grandmother is doomed," he said to me. "It is a stroke brought on by uremia. In itself, uremia is not necessarily fatal, but in this case seems to me hopeless. I need not tell you that I hope I am mistaken. At all events, with Cotard is their family doctor, with Cotard you're in excellent hands. Excuse me," he broke off as a maid came into the room with his tailcoat over her arm. "As I told you, I'm dining with the Minister of Commerce, and I have a call to pay first. Ah, life is not all a bed of roses, as one is apt to think at your age." And he graciously answered me his hand. I had shut the door behind me, and a footman was ushering us into the hall, when my grandmother and I heard a great shout of rage. The maid had forgotten to cut and hem the buttonhole for the decorations. This would take another 10 minutes. The professor continued to storm while I stood on the landing, gazing at my grandmother, who was doomed. Each of us is indeed alone. We set off homewards. So that kind of contrast, amazing, amazing. But these things, they come sort of set amidst just page after page after page of things that are just. People have called this the most boring of the volumes of In Search of the Lost Time. I don't know. It for me so far it has been it's had the most. I mean, it certainly has some great sections like that middle section, but there is kind of for most of part two, which is the second half of the book, is dominated by a very long dinner party. It's probably 200 pages. It is. I think if I read it again, I think if I was more careful about it, maybe it would be more interesting. But it's really boring, I have to say. But then it'll have like these kind of efflorescences of amazing insight and incisive observations. Let me see. I guess that's the same thing. Let's see. Let's see. Also, the narrator. Remember, I told you that towards the end of volume 2, he almost kisses a girl. Well, towards the end, about the middle of this book, he does kiss the same girl from the previous volume. So, I mean, stuff does happen, right? His grandmother dies. He kisses a girl in kind of a strange sort of a parallel to the situation in which he almost kissed a girl in the previous volume. That girl being Albertine, and there's not much of her, but I know that she does come back later and is quite an important character. I made note of a couple of other things that I wanted to say. So there is a section where he's talking about writing, and there's an author named Bergot, whom the narrator is a big fan of, and he rereads his work a lot. At one point, I think it's Monsieur Nepois, tells the narrator, "Oh, Bergotte is garbage," and but the narrator really loves Bergotte, and uh, he's he's talking about kind of the way that art will progress, and this is being written in like 1915. Um, when high modernism is kind of being created. Around the same time, you have James Joyce writing some of his early books, and not that he would have known, but Kafka is working. I'm going to talk about Kafka in a bit. Of course, Stravinsky would have been, so there's all this kind of invention, but he's comparing Bergotte, who is maybe perhaps old-fashioned, to a new writer. Here we go. But a new writer had recently begun to publish work in which the relations between things were so different from those that connected them for me that I could understand hardly anything of what he wrote. He would say, for instance, "The hose pipes admire the splendid upkeep of the roads." And so far, it's a parenthesis now, and so far it was simple. I followed smoothly along the roads. Continuing the quote, which set out every 5 minutes from Briand and Caudel. End of the quote. At which point I ceased to understand, because I had expected the name of a place and was given that of a person instead. Only I felt that it was not the sentence that was badly constructed, but I myself that lacked the strength and agility necessary to reach the end. I would start afresh, striving tooth and nail to reach the point from which I would see the new relationships between things, and each time after I had got about halfway through the sentence, I would fall back again, as later on in the army, in my attempts at exercises on the horizontal bar. I felt nevertheless for the new writer the admiration which an awkward boy. All right, so this is a lot like my experience reading this book. You start a sentence, and you're like, okay, and then it goes off someplace unexpected. It is interesting that he talks about two places being named, where he would expect to have the names of two places, the names of two people, since there are two volumes of this are Swann's Way and Guermantes Way, and these are just these are paths in his home village of Cambrai that go past Swann's house, and one that goes past this ancestral home of the Guermantes family. So, I guess he's having some fun about what he's doing, where he's sort of analogizing these pathways that he would take on these kind of rural rambles on a Sunday afternoon with the people whose homes he passed, and his experience, getting to know these people and their histories. So there you go. That's page 444, if you're interested. 444. And then I have a note here that Marcel's or the narrator's mother talks some sense to him on page 507. So I'm gonna read that to you because that's pretty good. This is he's been talking about how he's obsessed with the Duchess of Guermantes. One fine day, my mother, laying her hands on my forehead, as was her habit when she was afraid of hurting my feelings, and saying, "You really must stop hanging about trying to meet Madame de Guermantes. You're becoming a laughingstock. Besides, look how ill your grandmother is. You really have something more serious to think about than waylaying a woman who doesn't care a straw about you." Yeah, yes, exactly. And then a page later, and then it was over. I had given up my morning walks, and with so little difficulty that I felt myself justified in the prophecy that I should easily grow accustomed during the course of my life to no longer seeing a woman. No longer seeing any woman? Well, we know that's not going to be the case. And then there is further disillusion with the Duke and Duchess of Guermantes when he spends this long evening at a dinner party at their house. So a few more things happen, and one section in particular is, uh, which is during the course of this dinner party, he begins to realize how kind of vapid these aristocrats are, how little there really is of interest in them. The Duke of Guermantes has a collection of paintings by Elstir, a character from a previous volume, a painter whom the narrator is quite fond of, but doesn't really understand them, value them, think much of them. And then after the dinner party, he has to go because he's been invited to the home of Baron de Charlus, who is the brother of the Duke of Guermantes and a character who the narrator met on the beach in Volume 2. So, and he had a very strange conversation with him. He also had a strange conversation with him earlier in this book, several hundred pages earlier. And the Duke of Guermantes, the Baron de Charlus, it seems he's an eccentric character, and he'll just kind of have these hairpin turns of like if he likes the narrator or kind of hates him and thinks he's pathetic. So this scene, after the dinner party, when he goes to visit the Baron, it put me in mind, not the way it was written, but the kind of whole setting of something from the trial, perhaps. He's summoned to this old man's house in the middle of the night, so it's like midnight when he goes there, and he's kept waiting in a drawing room by a footman. All these people have footmen as servants and whatnot. So he's waiting in this drawing room, and the footman tells him, "Yeah, the Baron is seeing other visitors," and he's waiting there for a while, and he's like, "I guess I'm gonna go," and he gets up to leave, and the servant comes by again and says, "Oh no, you can't go. He really wants to see you." So then he's brought into the Baron's room. I believe it's his bedroom, and he's lying in bed, and he looks terrible. He's all sick, and he just lights into the narrator, and just tells him he's a terrible person, and well, let me read you one more bit here. This is good content. Good content. Watching a guy flip through a book. Well, he says that he's been saying offensive things about him. The Baron accuses the narrator of this. The narrator says, "Monsieur, I swear to you, I've said nothing that could offend you." "And who says that I am offended?" he screamed in fury, raising himself into an erect posture on the sofa on which he had hitherto been reclining motionless. While as the pallid, frothing snakes twisted and stiffened in his face, his voice became alternately shrill and solemn like the defeating onrush of a storm. Do you suppose skipping ahead, do you suppose it is within your power to offend me? You are evidently not aware to whom you are speaking. Do you imagine that the envenomed spittle of 500 little gentlemen of your type, heaped one upon another, would succeed in slobbering so much as the tips of my august toes? There you go. He also is offended because the Baron is offended when the narrator comes in and he says he invites him to put yourself in the Louis XIV seat. He answered with an imperious air. All right, so the narrator doesn't really know which is the Louis XIV seat. So he sits in an armchair, and Charlotte says, "Ah, so that is what you call a Louis XIV seat. I can see you're a well-educated young man," he exclaimed in derision. And then later he says, you don't even know the difference between a Louis XIV and a directory fireside chair. So he's apparently sitting in a directory fireside chair. It's crazy. And after going on about how horrible the narrator is, the narrator gets very mad and he destroys a hat. So the Baron has a hat that's been sitting there. I seized the Baron's new silk hat, flung it to the ground, trampled it, picked it up again, began blindly pulling it to pieces, wrenched off the brim, tore the crown in two, heedless of the continuing vociferations of Monsieur de Charlus, and crossing the room in order to leave, opened the door. To my intense astonishment, two footmen were standing one on either side of it, and they move away like as if they were just passing by, like doot 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 doot. So this is pretty crazy. And then so he goes back into the room, and I think one of the servants comes by and replaces the hat that he just destroyed with another hat. It's just like, so then the Baron de Charlus, he sort of has one of his mood swings and becomes amiable to him again, and he's like, well, I guess I could offer you a ride home. I could ride with you. Maybe I'll look at the moon or something. And they go downstairs and they go into a drawing room. The narrator doesn't quite remember if this was the one he was in before. And he's like, look at these paintings. This is my ancestor, the King of Poland, and the King of France, who I'm related to, or the King of England, who I'm related to. And apparently, from somewhere inside the house, Beethoven's Third Symphony is playing. Not third, the Pastoral Symphony, which is the seventh, I think. Anyway, Pastoral Symphony playing somewhere, but this is the 19th century. This is not a record playing, and they had records then. But you wouldn't have mistaken a record back then for an orchestra. It sounds like an orchestra is playing. Where is that coming from? Why does he have an orchestra playing in his house at past midnight? It's very odd, and yeah, it just seemed very much sort of that Kafka-esque trial thing where in the trial, the narrator would be summoned to, a meeting that was actually in an artist's studio that was up a weird staircase in an abandoned building, and when he went out through a certain door, there was actually there was like a window over the artist's bed, and you go through it, and it's the courtroom, and just strange things happening at odd times and in places you wouldn't expect. So, not to mention this fact that he's been accused, someone has been telling the Baron that the narrator is saying all kinds of stuff about the Baron and his rapid, changes in attitude toward him. Very strange. Of course, the trial and this were being written about the same time. These guys wouldn't have been reading each other, I don't think. And it seems they died about the same time, both pretty old, though Proust was about 10 years, was born about 10 years before Kafka. But yeah, both of those books were not published until quite a bit later. So anyway, that's about what I have to say about Guermantes Way. Oh, at the very end of this, he says that he was looking out a window and he noticed something. So there's a bit of a cliffhanger for you. He says, I noticed this thing. I'm going to tell you about it later. And then he doesn't tell you about it. He talks about another gathering of vapid aristocrats. So I guess we have to wait till volume 4 for the thrilling explanation of what that thing is that he saw looking out the window. I mean, come on. How can you say that this book, people say this book is boring, but he kisses a girl, he destroys a hat, he sees a thing through a window. This book has got some action in it, All right. Anyway, that is a. I don't recommend you just pick this book and read it on your own, but it certainly is continuing the story. It's got some great sections in it. It's got long sections of meandering waffle, but I enjoyed it. Um, yeah. So I'll see you in a couple of months and tell you about Volume 4, Sodom and Gomorrah, and whatever it is he sees through the window. Okay. Thanks for watching. Bye.